Hello, Kids Cook Real Food. Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector. And today we're talking about something that's really been a trend over the last years. And it has to do with high achieving students, smart kids, good kids who are hitting a wall. And I think this is a little bit of a new problem, a little bit of an old problem. And I'm very happy to have Dr. Jeannine Jannot here as our special guest. Thank you, Dr. Jannot.
Thank you for asking me. I'm very excited to have this conversation.
So your book title is fascinating. The title of her book is The Disintegrating Student. And to me, that just immediately brings up like imagery, the disintegrating student. And it also brings an emotion, of like fear for these kids. The subtitle is Struggling But Smart, Falling Apart, and How to Turn It Around. So Dr. Jannot has over 25 years of experience working with children, teens, young adults in both public and private school settings. See, she has a master's degree in school psychology from The Ohio State University, not too far from where I live, and a doctorate in child and developmental psychology from the University of Connecticut. Dr. Jannot began teaching college psych courses in 2010 and in 2014 founded The Balanced Student. So you've really had a wealth and a breadth of experience, but also 3 kids of your own who live in Georgia with you. So you've lived it from the inside, from the outside, from the school setting. And I'm really looking forward to talking today. But what's your story? How did psychology choose you? And then how did you end up focusing on this very specific problem for these kids who could or should be high achieving, but hit the wall?
Well, as often is the case, it was definitely a case of my psychology choosing me and my career path choosing me. I didn't set out to do any of this. So, I started as a business major and wasn't doing well in my business courses and took a psych class and went, oh, yeah, this is it. So, hence all the professional student stuff that followed with psychology. But what ended up happening was I walked to receive my doctorate and I was 2 weeks away from delivering my first child. So that, and then we moved from Connecticut to San Francisco right after he was born. So I spent about over a decade really just home raising the kids, doing all the mom things, being in the parent groups, volunteering. So that was really my life. I'd kind of given up being a school psychologist, but being a developmental child development, that was my doctoral degree. My hobby was pretty much just watching my kids develop. So what ended up happening was when we moved to Georgia, I'm in the Atlanta area, my youngest was starting preschool. And after about a year, the preschool said, would you like to teach a preschool class? I was like, sure, why not? And then after I did that for a little bit, my daughter went into elementary school, I started teaching college. And so kind of long story short, at that point, I had this incredible bird's eye view of what was happening to our kids across the educational spectrum from preschool, basically. My youngest was in elementary school, my middle student was in middle school, my son was in high school, and I was teaching college. And I was seeing the end product, these really stressed out kids and not having a lot of skills. That's when I decided, oh, somebody needs to help them. So I started the Balanced Student, where I do student and parent coaching. And it was out of that I found these disintegrating students. And that's why I wrote the book.
And it's such a visual image, as I said. So what do you mean when you say disintegrating student? Because it's not in some ways I picture like the superhero clip in the film where like someone just turns to dust. Obviously it's an analogy, but how does that look in real life?
In real life, and it's funny because if students see the book, they know exactly. They're like, oh yeah, that's me. So I coined the term the disintegrating student because it's not like they fall apart like all at once, but it's this process, this gradual fraying of their existence as a student that starts to be very problematic. So these students, by and large, tend to be gifted or high achievers. And they're the kids who in elementary school showed up, could get their work done in class and on the bus, didn't study, got good grades. And then all of a sudden they hit what I call a rigor tipping point, where all of a sudden the amount of rigor, which keeps ticking downward, we're seeing more and more rigor at younger ages. So they hit that, they have more responsibilities. They hit middle school. They change classes more. They're gaining more independence. They have more extracurriculars, and it overwhelms their ability to just kind of compensate by just being bright. And they're lacking a lot of skills. So this becomes very problematic, and it's very disorienting to them, and they basically start to struggle and fall apart.
So previously they were able to rely on like brute talent, or right, like they have some qualities, but they've never learned maybe study skills, and I'm literally looking at my own childhood going, yep, like that. That probably was me.
Yeah.
So where do the problems arise? Like, what is happening in the culture that is adding this ingredient to this recipe that's causing kids to disintegrate? Whereas I don't think 30 years ago they were. Am I right on that?
I feel that way. I mean, I certainly hit a rigor tipping point, but I was in, I think, my second round of grad school by the time it happened. And I don't, so many things have changed from back in the 70s and 80s when I was a student to today. And I think the biggest thing that's changed, and I think it was starting to show its true colors right around when I graduated high school, which was like in the early 80s. And so over these last 30, 40 years, we have developed an achievement culture in our society that, achievement culture sounds great. We want our kids to achieve and be successful, right? The problem is how we're defining success in today's achievement culture. And it's data. So kids will tell me, I just feel like a data point. So all that they're concerned about by and large is checking the boxes, getting the grade, getting the GPA, taking the right number of APs or, rigor courses, the right SAT, ACT scores for, all their things. And it has really eroded our kids' enjoyment of learning, their desire for learning, their curiosity is being kind of, pushed to the side, creativity. And it goes with a whole lot of other things because tech has also come a long way over the last 30 years and become a huge force in our kids' life. But you take those things together, and this is what's driving our kids to fall apart.
Well, that's well put. And of course, one of my TEDx talks is on critical thinking and how important curiosity is and how difficult it is to build that in our kids too. And along with creativity, we talk about, in the kitchen. And I will say, I see some hope. I see some hope in our schools, and we're a fairly high achieving type of town, I guess, type of community. But the teachers of my kids have really complemented soft skills like planning and organization and like knowing how to learn and, working hard and things like that. And so I'm encouraged by that. Like maybe there's hope.
That's what we need.
Yes, it is. And I'm curious. So we just observed something in a neighboring community where, because of the pandemic, the high school released a letter that said your final or your midterm exams will only count toward your grade if they're helpful. They won't count if they're hurtful. And when you said data point, it made me think of hearing secondhand of a teacher from that school saying that the kids feel abandoned. They feel it's almost the opposite of being a data point. They felt abandoned. And I wonder if there's a similar psychology to having too high standards or too low standards. Is there anything possible there?
I think you're onto something there, because I think the schools are struggling with the sweet spot to hit with our students. So we went into this school year hoping everything would be back to normal, quote unquote normal. And certainly, I think students definitely were telling me that's what they were expecting. And what I've seen is this mismatch, because what ultimately ended up happening, at least with the schools I'm familiar with, is they kind of doubled down on, recovery and, making up ground. So what you're describing is what I was hearing more of during like last year, the second semester last year, where there was a lot of grace, there was recovery. There were things like, we're not going to hurt you with your grades, because ideally that's what we want to do, as long as we are trying to help our students value the learning piece of it. Because unfortunately, the detrimental outcome, I think, of this achievement culture on kids is they've gotten so used to checking the boxes, because this has been going on since elementary school, that that's what they think school is. So if there's a shortcut, this is why cheating is such a pervasive problem in our schools, because that's the shortcut. Because I have so much to do, it's so important that I get the best grade possible here. I'll do it any way that I possibly can. And they also cheat to help each other, because they're under so much pressure. If they see a friend who's like, oh my gosh, I've got this thing tomorrow and I can't not get an A on it. They know that feeling, they help each other out. So it's a very mixed bag. So I think there's some very well-intentioned programs going on. I think there's very well-intentioned teachers. The question is it landing well with our students, and is it still setting them up to, like, say, go off to college? And my students would get kind of bent out of shape in college when they couldn't have recovery. It's like, what do you mean I can't recover my quiz grade? I'm like, that's just not how it works here. But they don't know that.
Well, that breaks my heart hearing about the cheating. What I think I'm hearing you say is that the system is flawed when we make it all about the data and all about the end goal and the end number on the piece of paper. But
Right.
Probably, like the neighboring community here, you can't just pull the rug out. You can't just say, well, we'll just take away the numbers because that's too ingrained. So how do we fix the system without turning the kids on their heads and making them feel abandoned, right? Like we need to maybe change things slowly or change things more gently for these poor kids. So speaking of schools, are schools equipped to meet the needs of a student who is disintegrating? Can they help?
They can, and I think they're trying. So, social emotional learning programs, SEL programs, are pretty widespread right now in school. With, implementation is always problematic, especially if you have a huge district, and that trickle down and making sure you're getting the feedback. Is it working? Is it landing right? Is it enough? I mean, because, if it's a Band-Aid, then, it's not going to take them very far. To kind of answer this question and also go back to what you just said about what can we do, unfortunately, we have a very top-down system in education, and it's driven from, politics, and it's driven from businesses and the colleges, and it kind of comes down, and finally gets down to that teacher and student. and the teachers are really the experts in education, and they're basically given the program's policies and plans, to carry out in their classrooms without. They're not really asked, as experts, what should we be doing? And ultimately the big fix is to get it way more bottom up. So looking at those teachers, so these well-intentioned teachers who are doing things on behalf of their students because they recognize what's happening, there are superheroes right now, because they might be fighting a system that's not really helping them or embracing that. So kudos to them, and kudos to any school system that by and large is taking that stance with their students. But it's hard when funding and all these things are tied to a school's grade card, where they have to have so many, attendance has to be at a certain level and so on. So that's where we kind of get bogged down in the stuff that is hurting us.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, moms and dads, this is gold when we talk about the top down versus the bottom up and why some of the systems are breaking. I think that's really key to hear this from you, a school psychologist, a mom, a college professor, let's listen to you, that the systems aren't quite working right now. And who should we be listening to? The classroom teachers, and possibly the parents. So most of the
For
listeners
sure.
today are parents. So how can parents help support their kids? And more importantly, how do we identify if our child is one who needs some help?
So as far as the achievement culture goes, it's going to be a huge ask to get that change. It's going to be very, very, very slow. So my advice to parents on that front is to basically acknowledge the culture in your family. So say, hey, so here's the reality, whether you're homeschooling or in a public school or in a private school, there's a reality about what the expectations are in the culture, that academic achievement culture. So put that on the table, with your kid, and talk about, well, so here's what, we hear, and here's what we're told, and here's what we think we should be doing, and here's what we think success is. What is success for us? What is success for you? Is taking 8 APs something that you should be doing? For so many kids, that's not realistic, and it's not helpful for that to be hanging over a family's head or a student's head, just because that's the expectation. So redefining what is success in our family for our kids is monumental. And I think a lot of people who homeschool have already done that. They've said, we're gonna take a lot more control here and do it our way, in a way that's right for you and helpful to you. So I think that's kind of huge. When the first thing that parents will tend to see when a kid is disintegrating is that their grades become inconsistent. So they'll start, this A student, by and large, all of a sudden will throw in a C here and there, stop turning some things in. So they get that, hey, little Johnny hasn't been turning in their homework assignment for 3 weeks now. It's like, what? And so many parents are on portals where they can see in almost real time what's happening. So that's a sign. And usually what happens then is the parent will say, hey, little Johnny, what's going on? And the kid will say, I don't know. And they mean it, because they really don't understand what's happening, because the way I approached this before always worked. And now all of a sudden I'm getting this feedback that it's not working. So this is a really tricky time, because there's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding that can happen at this point between a parent and a kid, because they're thinking about different things in their head as to what's causing this. So the parent thinks, okay, my kid's just being lazy. I hear that a lot. They're not motivated. They don't care anymore. And because we're so well-intentioned, we offer help. Do you need a tutor? Should I talk to the teacher? Should we have a meeting with the teacher? Can I help you? We offer all this stuff, and the kid says, no, I've got this. They never do. That's what they'll tell you. They'll say, I've got this. And so a parent's brain goes, so they're in control of this. So it becomes about their kid being resistant in this moment. And what's going on in the kid's head, their story is, okay, my parents care more about me than my grades. I don't want to disappoint my parents. This is really scary. I don't think I'm smart anymore, because clearly the feedback is telling me I can't do this. And they also tend to think it's only them, because they don't self-disclose. They don't ask for help. So they don't know that their best friend might be experiencing the same kinds of issues. They don't talk to each other about this, because it's threatening, it's embarrassing, and they're trying to self-protect.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, everything you said made perfect sense. And I was thinking before you said it, oh yeah, the parent in that situation is going to think discipline. I think the kid is right, doing naughty things or wrong things. And then all the solutions are achievement minded. How can I help you get your grades back up, when instead of achievement, we need to be focusing on the heart and the mental health of our child, right? Who we do love more than their grades, but sometimes we don't behave that way.
Well, it's not even our behavior. I've asked kids this over and over again. Why do you think that? Because I know it's not true. They think it because our brains just work in statistics. So it automatically will calculate like how often something happens. And what our kids' brains are telling them is, your parents talk to you an awful lot about school and academics and how you're doing. And so their brain goes, that's the important thing. That's what they care about.
Mm. It's almost like an imaginary tally system. Every time we
Uh-huh.
say, how'd that test go? And I'm hearing my own voice because I do have a
Oh,
child who's very worried
me
about
too.
their grades. And so I feel like if I worry about what they worry about, I'm connecting. But yeah, I can totally see the imaginary tally system in the child's brain. So the practical tip there is parents make a concerted, intentional effort to ask, as maybe the first question is something not about grades, data points, scores, and
Yeah.
achievement,
Like
right?
when they come home, say, hey, it's good to see you. That's really hard to do. If, because a lot of times we have on our mind, worrying about how that test go. Did you turn in that thing? Did you talk to the teacher? And we offload our anxiety. And this is why we talk to them about academics so much. It causes us great stress and anxiety to worry about them because we're well-intentioned. We want them to be successful, but that kind of overrides. And then we offload all of our anxiety onto them. And then this is the backfiring kind of thing. When we do that, they just shut down.
Mm.
So we do, it's a really hard, I mean, I live and breathe this stuff and I struggle mightily with this because it's coming from in here. So we kind of have to recognize as parents that it is based on our fear, and be more mindful if we can of saying things like, hey, I'm so glad to see you. Let's not talk about school quite yet, especially for those introverted kids who come home who need some time to decompress. The last thing they need is that assault of, how'd your day go? What'd you do? Did you get, how'd that test go?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so practical and so good. And the reminder for, the introvert kids, especially if we're an extrovert parent, we don't always
Yeah.
automatically understand where they're coming from. And then our homeschooling families, I'm sure, really important to not talk about school sometimes.
Oh yeah, because you
you
would
know,
have to have boundaries around like this is school time and this is family lifetime. Yeah.
Mhm. And
Which
separate.
again, it's got to be hard.
Yeah, yeah. So now speaking of practical, I love digging into the practical tips so people feel like they're filling their parenting toolbox. And you talk about practical tools, skills that disintegrating students need in 7 categories. Okay, I'm going to say these slowly because they're very good. Organization, time management, stress, dun, 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 study habits, sleep, mindset, and screens. Okay, so that's a lot. Go to Dr. Jeannine Jannot's website and check all those out. But can you choose like 2 or 3 hot tips that parents could just implement easily in some of those categories?
Sure. I mean, the reason I even put them in those categories is those are the categories that, when our kids are disintegrating, it's not because they're not smart anymore. It's because they have skill deficits and counterproductive behaviors in those 7 categories. So that's like huge good news for everybody. So it's, for the kid to know, A, you're as smart as you ever were, that you never needed skills like these. You've never had to use them. So once they can understand, oh, that's the problem, that's huge. So just a couple, because of virtual school and because just the nature of how students are being students these days, I think there's a really good tip in the book. I call it Remake Your Bed. And I tell all students this. I always find out, do you study in bed? Do you do schoolwork in bed? And oftentimes I'll hear, yeah, because it's comfortable, whatever. But there is a really good reason not to do that. And that's because our brain actually makes associations. And so if we really should only sleep in bed, our kids should only be sleeping in bed. So if they're doing something else bed like, their schoolwork, which they don't like, it's causing them stress and anxiety, the body actually can become conditioned to hold on to those feelings in a way that when they go to bed to go to sleep, their body's triggered to feel that anxiety at some level that was associated with the schoolwork. And a kid may not even notice it. And our kids are very sleep deprived, so they may fall asleep quickly, but the quality of their sleep, they may wake up in the middle of the night. Those are all things that can be influenced by this. So the earlier you can kind of tell the kid the why behind that, because if you just say, don't do your homework in bed, That's probably not going to go over as well as having a more respectful dialogue about the why. So, hey, I learned this thing about, your brain, and if you do something in bed and it can influence sleep, then your kid's way more likely to do that. And the earlier, the better. If you're trying to talk a 17-year-old into that right now, yeah, I didn't have luck when I started too late. It was like, okay, I guess we've gone too far there. Another sleep related thing, our kids are really, so tired in the morning. Getting a good dose of morning light can help reset their circadian rhythms and also give them a little bit, push them out of sleep inertia if they're in it, that foggy, groggy kind of feeling, because they could stay in that for 30 minutes to 3 hours, which means your kid could go to school kind of foggy brain until like lunchtime, which is such a waste. So bright light in the morning, if you can't get sunlight, you can get those sun lamps, or just any place that has, really bright light can help get them awake in the morning.
That's really interesting, because I know in my house, I like to have the really low lights on in our kitchen dining room area in the morning, just because it feels more gentle to me. But probably you're saying like, just blaze them, turn them all on.
But you could start with
Yeah.
I'll do the same, and I'm usually up first, and that's my quiet introvert time. But at some point, if we want to really kind of start energizing ourselves, it's that light is really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, those are super practical, and I love the science geek part of it. And I will say that although I'm not a homeschooling family, we did have one child homeschool for 1 year, the craziness of the pandemic and so on. And this child definitely did a lot of work in bed and on bed, and has totally retained that and totally has trouble falling asleep at night. So thank you.
You're
At least
welcome.
I'm sure other people will benefit from that one too, but that one was just for me.
Yeah, virtual learning really made that a huge problem, a huge problem.
I bet. And, it's good for adults to hear that too. Don't answer your emails in your bed, adults, right? Mm-hmm. Don't read stressful things like the news. Don't watch stressful things in your bed. All very,
even
very
watching TV. A lot of people will watch TV to try just basically any screens in bed, or any screens at night 30 to 60 minutes before you want to fall asleep, just are not very helpful. And one of the best ways for us to get our kids to do something is for us to do it first.
Mm-hmm. They smell hypocrisy a mile away, don't they?
And they model us. They watch us so closely, like from the minute they're born. And so what we do matters way more than what we say.
Mm-hmm. So now,
as hard as that is,
it is. Other than modeling imperfectly, which we have identified as a problem, we know we've talked about well-intentioned schools that are missing the mark. Are there any gotchas for parents who are like maybe trying to make a well-intentioned, helpful action that ends up being detrimental instead?
Oh, there are so many.
Oh,
but again, so I laugh at this because this is one of those things that makes us feel like, oh man, I wish I hadn't done that, or we feel regretful. And I don't like that. I don't like the whole parent guilt thing, because I think we are just showing up, loving our kids, and trying the best we can. And when we know better, we do better. And we never do perfect. So, I mean, that's sort of my stand. I mean, I have to feel that way because, again, I'm a quote unquote parenting expert and mess up all the time. So one of the biggest things, probably more so than anything, especially tied in with this achievement culture issue, is we love our kids so much, and we are so worried about them being successful and their negative consequences of bad grades, not turning things in, bad GPA, that we overhelp. We help our kids when they not only don't want it, they don't need it. It's probably not developmentally appropriate, and we get in there and we problem solve. And that is problematic for a couple of reasons, but a lot of it is that if we've been doing that for a very long time, the subtle message we're sending to our kids is you can't handle it. And then they start to kind of act like they can't handle it, or they become entitled, where they feel like everybody should be doing stuff for me. But more likely they're the kid who's just like, yeah, could you do that for me? Or yeah, I'm not sure, go ahead, can you do that? And we don't want our college students doing that. We want them to feel like they can handle developmentally appropriate things. And when it comes to problem solving, I'm a professional problem solver. That's what I do. So my instinct is, my kid comes to me with an issue. I jump right in there. Well, did you do this? Or maybe you need to do that. Or can I help with this? And I'm trying to solve their problem with my, 58-year-old brain. And they're like, could you stop talking now? Because I just want you to listen. What they really want from us is not necessarily for us to jump in and solve the problem. They want to be heard. And that is really hard for us as parents to just kind of zip it and listen to understand, not judge, not get defensive, to make sure that we can kind of say back to them what we're hearing them say, so that we are communicating to them, A, I'm listening, B, I want to understand, and C, do I understand? Is this the right thing? And oh my goodness, that is game changing. And I had to do this with my youngest. She's a freshman in college right now, through high school, because she would always just come home and just, it was just all the things. And I would just jump into problem solving mode. And she would get so angry with me. And when we figured out what the problem was, now she just does this, like, Mom, just listen. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we've communicated in a way that we've been honest. I mean, I'm telling her why I'm doing it, and she's telling me I don't need it. And so now we have a system so that I'm showing up for her in the way that I need to.
And that did take work, because I'm thinking, most kids aren't going to articulate, stop talking. They're not going to say, I just want to be heard, right? It's not a conversation. It's just a gut feeling in them where they know that they're not getting what they need. And so parents put down the screens, tell yourself to zip it. It's such a challenge, because I think our knee jerk as the wise, experienced adults is to fix, but we mustn't.
But we're really, we're depriving them of their long-term growth for our short-term comfort. And I think when we think of it in that terms, it makes a lot of sense as to why we would not want to do that.
Absolutely. And luckily, our listeners here at Kids Cook Real Food, I believe, are more well-equipped to internalize that tip and to do it, because we already understand that long-term goal setting of it's quicker and easier to just feed our kids, but yet we are, buckling in and saying it's better for them in the long term to teach them to cook. It's very similar.
Absolutely. So much autonomy and control at that developmentally appropriate level. I mean, what that says to your kid is, I trust you, I respect you, and I'm just delighted to watch you grow and learn things. And we don't want to deprive our kids of opportunities like that. So that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about that communication is more listening than talking, right? Adults, communication's more listening than talking. And we do find that happens in the kitchen too, right? That we can manage our kids' feelings, we can hear more about their day. And so that's one of the reasons I love doing what I do. Now let's dial it back to our younger kids, because, any of our listeners out there who have younger kids who aren't in middle and high school yet, we're thinking, okay, I don't want achievement culture to get its claws into my child. So what can I do to prevent that, support them, build their resilience?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the feedback I get a lot from my book is it gets read by middle school and high school and college parents whose kids is disintegrating or has disintegrated. And what they always say is, man, I wish I would have read this sooner. I wish I would have known this sooner. So, I remember being a parent of littles, and, if I heard things about middle school and high school, I was like, talk to the hand, that's not my kid, or that's so far away, I can't even. So what I would say is, there is a lot, knowing this stuff a little bit earlier, sort of it's kind of coming in some form or another, and being aware of sort of the pitfalls that could be presented would be just really helpful to know before you get to them. It's just way easier to deal with. So the first thing I would say is, raising little kids if you can start normalizing mistakes now, because we're raising a generation of kids who have no tolerance for failure and mistakes, and neither do the parents. So that's developing these kids who tend to get into the mindset that helps them disintegrate. So one of the ways I think is awesome to, first of all, make mistakes yourself and don't try to hide it. When you screw up, say, hey, I messed up today. And one way you can do that in a fun family way is around the dinner table, have like dinner bloopers where everybody goes around and says, what was your blooper for today? And you can almost make it a contest and normalize it. We don't hide mistakes. We're not looking for perfection. That's huge, because people who make mistakes and don't get, taken down by them, they're the people who are resilient, have good coping skills. They're gritty, they'll keep trying again until they get it, and they end up being very successful. So that's number one out the gate. Yeah, I would always say prioritize your relationship with your child more than their academics. So again, kind of keeping the statistics in mind of like, how often are we talking about school? Listening more, problem solving less. I think that's something that can start early as well. And trying to help our kids develop a growth mindset, which would be a kind of way of looking at challenges as something that lead to learning, being open to hearing criticism and getting feedback is really important. Being okay with making mistakes, being okay with working hard and putting in effort, that those aren't bad things. A lot of students who disintegrate feel the opposite. They're trying to protect themselves, and their self-esteem has been tied up into being very smart. So when they get that feedback, they're doing everything they can to kind of backtrack that and protect themselves.
That is gold. That is gold. Parents, rewind, listen to that last 3 minutes over and over, print it out, put it on your mirror in the morning. Because it's really, really hard to undo some of those habits. If you have, a perfectionist, if you have a child who can't handle failure, if you have a child whose self-worth is tied up in doing something successful or achieving a certain milestone, unraveling is really, really hard. So we knit the sweater together the right way the first time, or the best way, right? With all of our mistakes and flaws in the process. And to end, Dr. Jannot, I always like to leave our parents with a message of hope, because sometimes it can feel like parenting is a big job and a hard job and a weighty job. And as much as we can say we don't mind mistakes, some of us, we're raised in and out of achievement culture ourselves. So what is sort of your message of hope that you want to leave to encourage our families with?
So we are not alone. If we're struggling in our family, I find a lot of people think it's just them, just their kid, just them. And it's not. This is, especially during the pandemic, it's been a very, very hard 2 years. And so I think that needs to be normalized. But the thing I would say that I think is most hopeful is the best thing that we can do to protect our kids. The most protective thing is the simplest. We need to be a warm and supportive adult in their life. That is it. That is number one. And it seems like it's not enough. It seems like, well, but I should be doing something, and I should be, fixing things and doing what our kids really need to have good coping, good resilience, is to know that they have at least one warm and supportive adult who has unconditional positive regard and love for them. And that protects against all kinds of adversity. And all of our students are experiencing adversity right now. We all are in this pandemic. So showing up and loving each other, it's so simple. But we have to forget all the habits that have been driving our parenting behavior maybe up until this point, and kind of flipping it and making sure that piece that seems so obvious is really getting across to our kids.
Mm-hmm. Not something for the to-do list, but for the to-be list. right? What we knew inherently when we had the newborn and the toddler who were so cute and just needed us to be there. Still got to be there for the tween and the teen.
And that's such a great analogy, because I often say, if we parented our teens the way we parented toddlers, they would be so much better off if we let them fall and try and do all the things. It's that whole high stakes, high pressure achievement culture that gets in our head, and we don't see that anymore as like an opportunity to learn and grow, which it was when they were toddlers. So yeah, if you can get that mindset back of being that parent when they were like 4, we'd be golden.
Oh, what a perfect reminder. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeannine Jannot. Everyone, I know you've enjoyed listening to Dr. Jeannine as much as I have. Go buy the book or get it from your local library, like the good stewards of our budget that we are, The Disintegrating Student. And I do like the encouragement too, that this is not a book, this is not a topic, this is not a parenting goal just for parents of middle and high school students. This is for all of us. Once your head is out of the toddler years and you can breathe, it's time to be intentional about your family culture. So thank you so very much, Jeannine.
Thank you for having me.
Healthy Parenting Connector listeners, we will be back next week with another episode, another expert sharing the information you need to raise those healthy, independent adults. I'm Katie Kimball for Kids Cook Real Food.